Hello. Well, today I went to Mount Auburn Cemetery to draw, and I drew a number of pictures using a rather dried up Arteza marker, which was gray to start with, but it was very dry brushy. And I had quite some fun with this. Mount Auburn Cemetery is full of dead people, and it's very hilly, and so it's a lot of fun to just see these little monuments happening in a very forested, shady, lots of trees everywhere, and every once in a while you'd see a little monument. Here was a hill looking up the hill, and you had some large monuments up at the top, and then little tiny ones down here that were, I don't think they're related, this to that, but could have been. I didn't really read the names too much. But I was fascinated by the way the light was coming through the trees and hitting certain spots and not hitting others. There was shade and light, and I wish I had brought my black paper with white pencil so I could convey that better. Here was a quadrifoil cutout in a gravestone, little quadrifoil glory hole here to look through, and in the distance are these other monuments. Well, in addition to drawing with this dried up marker and big heavy watercolor-like paper, I used a pen, which I will show you in a second, and rather glossy cardstock, which may not have been the best thing to use, but it's what I used, so sue me. And let me just find a piece of that paper, see, this is different than that. Gravity. Yeah, I've got way too much paper in my house. All of this is glossy. It's glossy on the other side, so it's very smooth, but the ink sort of sits on top, doesn't really soak in, so my fingers would always, not always, but often would smear it like that, so there's some smearing happening. So here's the pen I used. This is a pen that was bequeathed to me by a pen collector friend of mine who died yesterday, and his name is Steve. And many of the pens that I now have back are pens that he got from me, or at the same pen show that we were at, I would say. I think you're looking for a PFM. That guy over there has one, and I would be the matchmaker. Sometimes I would buy pens with him in mind. Sometimes he would buy pens without my help in any way. And now he called me on the phone to say that he was not long for the world and wanted me to have the pens. And I was very honored that he did that. And I talked with his daughter about how I want to memorialize, I guess, or tribute to him. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the value, as it were, of the pens I got from him, and I will give to kids pens that they can use. And if they lose them or if they break them somehow, it's not going to be breaking a valuable collector's pen. There'll be pens like Esterbrook's or wearers, or pens that are really, really good. I'm not going to give away pens that are bad, but I want to give away pens that I maybe will instill a collection or a love of pens with kids. And often you find kids at pen shows being dragged around by their parents, and they would rather be home. Sometimes they really get into pens and sometimes they don't, and usually I whisper to the parent, do you mind if I give your child a gift? And they say, no, that's fine. And I have been giving them mechanical pencils, and I'll show them, 5 or 6, and I'll say, you can get the one you want. And they're all vintage, generally off-brand pencils, but it's a way that I think I can instill interest in the hobby, and at best and at worst, I allow the kid to not interrupt a big deal that I'm making with the parents. Okay, so there's part of that is part of it. But anyway, Steve, the guy that owned these pens who died yesterday, is also for his job, he sold textbooks to grade schools. He traveled the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I don't know if he went elsewhere, but he represented textbook publishers to the schools, and he loved kids. I was told by his daughter, and I never really talked about kids with Steve when he was alive. We talked about pens and music and autographs. He collected autographs. That was his big passion in terms of collecting. But he loved the Boston Red Sox. He loved the classical music. He loved autographs. And I learned, I didn't know this before either, but he was also a marathon runner. So today, going to Mount Auburn Cemetery, I brought one of the pens I got from him to do the drawings, sort of in honor of him and for me to focus my thoughts on him. And I came up with these drawings. Now, this pen I got from him, I must say that the cap didn't really screw on very tightly, and I was able to take a barrel and nib that I had in my collection, and I just did a cap and barrel switcheroo, and they both work better now than they did before. So the pen gods were looking down upon me, and this particular pen, I haven't used his pen before, and I hadn't really used mine in a very long time, and this was really a surprise to me that it's very, very light and very, very thin and rather long, and it almost seems weightless in my hand. It's really a strange feeling. Normally I use pens that are fatter and heavier, I guess, but this was very, very lightweight, and I put the nib that was in this when I did the switcheroo. This is Steve's cap. This is my barrel, and I have Steve's barrel and my cap on a different pen. So, but the nib that I had in this pen is very, very thin, slightly flexible. It's a little broader looking here on this paper because the ink, I don't know, the texture of the paper or something. I don't know what it does, but was very different on this slick paper than it would be if I drew it on paper that was not slick. Come on, Pierre. Now see this? These fine lines are much finer on this paper than they are on the paper I was using to draw with today. So it was a little bit clumsier. I don't want to say that. That's not right, the word I want. It was just not as refined as I thought it would be. But I don't like to blame my materials. So why did I draw these drawings like this one? This reminded me of this one. I drew this one before. The background here is all pretty dark. And what attracted me to this view rather than the view to the left or the right or behind me were these vertical, 5 or so vertical markers that are about 6 feet tall. And they were casting 5 shadows. And these were all essentially the same. And then the row behind them, they were all ragtag and, no two monuments looked the same. These were all done by different designs. Some were sort of round with all sorts of bric-a-brac. Some were very simple. But these were all different, and these were all the same. And they all belonged to one family. And it was just really cool that within this one family there were all these different styles. Here you had the 3 siblings, or mother, father, son, or who knows what, and the shadows they cast. And then it was just, again, seeing the similarities between the stones and sort of the complete chaos that sometimes happens. Here there were 2 stones. This one says father. This one says mother. And mother is kind of tipping over, getting a little closer to her husband. I saw another one that said husband, wife, but this one, father and mother. Across from the little road from where my dad and mom are buried, there were little plaques on the ground for no stones, just a horizontal plaque. And it said mother. The second one said husband. And the third one said father. So I don't know if the father was the milkman or she divorced the father and then remarried the husband, and then they died, and then the father died, and they put the father in later. But when you read them left to right, which is what they were laid out that way: mother, husband, father. So my mind went all sorts of places. So the background, these were sort of drenched in light, not directly. They were casting a shadow this way, but behind them was this deep, dense shrubbery. Occasionally you could see through openings, you could see the trees behind. This one was a few feet away from those two, and this was some sort of urn-like thing on top of something else, on top of an octagonal Gothic-y smokestack, on top of a square base, and bric-a-brac left and right and center. This one was essentially a casket-sized marker. This is one of the 6 columns. It's a little squat column about maybe this big, with a cap and a bottom, and holding up the big top slab. And way in the distance was a little white. Everything was kind of dark except for right here. That was bright white vase, carved vase in bright sunlight. So it was just brilliantly bright. Here we have another sarcophagus here, and then 4 stones next to each other. In front of it, towards me, was a overgrown field of flowers and weeds, and then it had some flat markers on the ground and a couple of standing up ones here. But it's really neat how you look at this and you don't see tombstones, you see buildings and forest and trees, and I like the scale thing that happens. Here I tried doing some water brush on top of what I drew and didn't like it. This was a path, all very dark, and they had these tombs going into the hillside, and just a chaotic scene. And here's the gate, looking from the inside of the cemetery, looking out. But all in all, it was really fun spending time with Steve. Oh, there was one other one I wanted to show you, but where did that go? This one. I almost thought I would write Steve's name down here rather than Jones and put his dates in, but I decided to be realistic. This was a really fun monument, I thought, where there was 3 very rough-hewn stones chipped and carved to look like rocks. They weren't made into shapes. They were made into what looked to be naturalistic shapes. And then there was a flat facet that they would have the names and dates and stuff on them. And I really like that one. Again, it had a very dark background. I can fill in the dark background while I'm home. And anyway, I did all of these drawings that I showed you in 2 hours time. So they work pretty fast, and luckily I have a pen that works fast. That allows me to move across the page without worry about it skipping. So here we go. So thanks. I know that says Thamks, Thamks, but I misspelled it, okay? Sorry. Thanks, Steve. Godspeed. Bye.